Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're going to be taking a sneak peek at a new game which is coming out in just about a week on December 6th. That game is Strategic Command World War II World at War. World at War is the second of the Strategic Command games that has been, or will have been, released since the IP transitioned over to Slitherine. The first was released about a year and a half ago, and it was Strategic Command War in Europe. Strategic Command is a long-running series dating back to some games that were released with Battlefront. Those games have been re-released with Matrix and Slitherine games. The new games are being developed by Fury Software, and as I've already said, Matrix and Slitherine are publishing them. I played the last version of the game, which came out, the War in Europe game, on my channel a little bit, which was a game that looked strictly at Europe. So it didn't look at the Pacific Theater, and that was actually, at least according to my memory, way back in the, the early 2000s or late 90s when the first Strategic Command game came out, it was a focused game looking at the conflict in Europe, and that's what this last game looked at. Well, Strategic Command World at War, as you can guess by its title, has a broader overlook. It looks at the European theater, but it also looks at the Pacific theater as well. It seems, and I've only played it for a few minutes, but it seems to look and feel a lot like the last Strategic Command game, just with a broader outlook. There's over 4,000 hexes, it's a huge map, and I'm curious how they're going to kind of play with the fact that if you play the 1939 campaign, Japan isn't at war, at least with the United States or the Western powers for 2 years, but they are fighting sort of their own independent war against the Chinese, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance all these different things. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump in here and take a first look at this new game. You've got a bunch of options here on the main screen. You can do things like play online versus other people. You can do a hot seat multiplayer. We're just going to do a basic single-player game tonight. And as we go in here, we're going to go ahead and see there are, six? No, can I count? Yeah, 6 different campaigns that come with the game. There's a 1939 start date, a 1942 start date, and a 1943 start date. There are those same 3 start dates for a race to victory, which is, as according to the description, the race to victory campaigns have more restrictive and time-restrictive victory conditions. So it's kind of like playing a harder version of the campaign. You have to win more quickly or more decisively. But we're just going to play the stock 1939 World at War campaign. The Axis one obviously looks at kind of the high tide of the Axis powers, and the Allied one looks at sort of, once the tide has definitively turned, Midway's occurred, the Battle of Stalingrad's occurred, the Americans are in the war. By 1943, things are going badly for both the Japanese and the Germans, and by that point, it's probably a little bit too late for them to stem the tide. But in terms of the one we're going to be playing through, I hope to play the 1939 start date and maybe even play through to the conclusion of the war. So we're going to go ahead and play that. Let's go ahead and click on the victory conditions here. We'll see for decisive victory, the Axis need to control Berlin, Paris, London, Manchester, Moscow, Stalingrad, Cairo, Tokyo, Seoul, Chongqing, Delhi, Manila, and Canberra. So basically, the Axis need to take the Philippines, they need to take Australia, China, India. They need to hang on to Korea and Tokyo, and then the Allies in Europe need to take Cairo, so Egypt, Stalingrad and Moscow, so they need to knock Russia out of the war, and they need to take London and Manchester, so England needs to be invaded, as well as the fall of Paris and obviously holding on to Berlin. The Allied objectives are kind of more or less what happened in history. Berlin, Rome, Paris, London, Moscow, Washington, D.C., Tokyo, Seoul, Chongqing, and Delhi. All need to be controlled. I don't know about Seoul. Did that ever get liberated in the war? I'm not sure. But again, those are the victory conditions for decisive victory. There are, I think, like minor victories or I don't know if there's a draw, but there's not necessarily. You don't have to win decisively to win. I think if time runs out, then it kind of just evaluates where people are at. Okay, so we're going to be playing the 1939 campaign. So let's go ahead and play the campaign. Once we click on that button, we're going to get an option that pulls up for us to pick our side. We can play as the Allies, we can play as the Axis. The Allies obviously have many more powers, but the majority of them are not at war right away. So if you play as the Allies in 1939, you get to play as Great Britain and France right away. you'll get to play as nationalist China right away, and also Poland. But the USSR will not be under your control. The United States will not be under your control, or if it is, it won't be at war. You can't fight. I'm not sure how they model that. I haven't played this version of the game. But we're actually going to play as the Axis. I think it's a little bit more straightforward to play as the Axis in this game. It'll allow us to dictate sort of control, tempo, and whatnot for the first couple of years in the game. So I really think playing a 1939 scenario really is better to play as the Axis if you're trying to show the game off and kind of dictate the way that the war is being fought. That way we're not waiting on the AI to react. And I think it's unlikely that either France or Great Britain are in position to launch an offensive into Germany. So I think that'll be the better way to show this off. I'm just going to play the standard intermediate difficulty. There are, 5 different difficulty levels. So there's expert, veteran, intermediate, novice, and green. The green and novice give penalties to the AI. They get less money. They're less difficult. So, and then if you play on the harder difficulties of either veteran or expert, the AI gets buffs. So they have better line of sight. They have more experience. They have more money. But in this case, we're just going to play the neutral game, 0% buff for the AI. They're playing under the same rules that we are. We could modify this too if we wanted to create like a custom difficulty, but I'm not going to do that. We're just going to play as the standard intermediate difficulty in this particular campaign. Additionally, there's a whole wealth of settings and things you can set up. You can turn 3D units off if you want to play with more traditional NATO-type counters. You can leave 3D units on if you want to see that. You can get animations of the actual, I think, fighting or explosions or something, showing moves, combat, messages from the AI, retreats, a bunch of different settings here. You actually have some advanced settings as well that give you even more detail. But we're going to go ahead and just kind of leave everything as is, stock default. I prefer the 3D settings. I know that some people prefer the NATO counters, but I think for a series like this, and also just for my own personal enjoyment, I do like to see the little models move around on the battlefield. So with that being said, I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat, and then we'll jump into the game. J Street, the Battle of Midway. I thought it was like June 6th, but I could be wrong. Nope, June 4th. Between the 4th and the 7th. So I think the 6th was the decisive day, I think. But the 4th through the 6th is the Battle of Midway. So that would make sense that the sort of allied, the Axis peak is literally on the eve of Midway, and Stalingrad has not yet happened. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the game. One thing I do like with these games is I think their main screens and their art is really well done. Gotta love the bombing raid sirens. Okay, so the game has begun, and so has World War II. So World War II has begun. Extra, extra, London telegram, war, German troops invade Poland, Nazis bomb Warsaw. Well, technically, we're not at war yet with Great Britain or France, but that's a nice little intro graphic anyway. And as every game begins, and at various times throughout these games, you get strategic advice that will pop up that kind of give you tips or objectives for your country. In this case, you can see this one is pertaining to Japan. It's saying, winning the war in China. We have invested a great deal of effort in our war with China, but its decisive victory eludes us. And then it's talking about how Nanning is the last major Chinese port getting foreign aid, including supplies from the United States. So we should try to gain control of the city of Nanning, which is, I think, down here to the south, and is sort of giving us an objective to take this town. I'm assuming we'll get like a morale perk if we accomplish that, but I'm not sure. In addition to that, we'll get some additional strategic advice from Japan, saying that we should avoid war with the United States and the United Kingdom as long as possible, and that we need to avoid sending naval units near Hawaii, Alaska, or North America, since it'll increase U.S. chances of joining the war and increasing U.S. mobilization. It's also recommending that we avoid a war with the USSR. And to do these things, it's telling us that to prevent the USSR from swinging toward the Allies, we need to keep units in Manchuria. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name of these cities, but we need to keep Japanese troops in 6 cities in Manchuria, and then we need to avoid war with the UK and the British for as long as possible. I'm not sure if we start with troops in all of those towns or cities or whatever. So I'll have to mark that down real quick. I'm not sure how you re-access the advice. Okay. And then, is there any strategic advice for the Germans? No? All right, well, we go right in. So it just gave us 2 pieces of advice for playing as Japan, but we didn't get any for anybody else. In the case of the Japanese, it wants us to keep troops in whatever the name of this city is, up here near the north, so we have troops there. We also need to keep troops in Tizitsar, which is right here. We have troops there. We also have troops here, which is another one of the towns. Yankai, another one. Harbin also have troops there, and then the 6th city is here. So we do have troops in all 6 cities for the moment. So we'll need to make sure that we keep that as is. Additionally, you can see here we're at war with China. We've actually progressed pretty far inland into China. We have garrisons in Fuchao and Amoy. You don't want to move your garrisons out of these types of towns in China because they could very easily cause partisans or nationalist troops to rise up against you. And frankly, garrison troops aren't good for much as far as the Chinese campaign's concerned. So really, in China, you're going to get some additional sort of restrictions that pop up as the war goes on, which I think will happen after the first turn. So I'll wait till that triggers to talk about that. But our main objective is down here. We have a national morale objective at Nanning. We have 1 troop that can get there. And then you can see we also have a bunch of naval units around here. So we've got the aircraft carrier Kaga. We've got some destroyers. I'm really curious how well the game models naval combat. You can see here we have the Fuso, the Ishi, the Zuho, the Nagato. We've got quite a few battleships and I think destroyers around here. Obviously, it's not a 1-to-1 naval comparison, but they do pretty good on the carriers, so that's pretty impressive in terms of the number of ships on the map. If we zoom out all the way, we can see this grand strategic map of the entire globe. Obviously, it's kind of hard to play at that level. Actually, if you click on a unit, it'll bring you into a closer view, so you can't even play at that level of the map. But here you can see a really quick overview. Chinese troops in China, Chinese troops in Manchuria, Japanese troops in China, Japanese troops in Manchuria, and then sort of in the southeast or southwest Pacific. And then we have 1 base over here, which is Truk, which we have a single destroyer at. It's a secondary supply city. It's a national morale objective. And then all of these other islands and whatnot bases, which are currently unoccupied by anybody. Additionally, we've got this warship icon around the island of Hawaii, or islands of Hawaii. So if we move our ships inside this sort of picket line, then that's going to cause the Americans to increase their mobilization against us. So we want to keep our ships outside of this line, at least until we're ready to go to war with the United States, because there's really no point in antagonizing the United States. Similarly, that exists over here as well. I don't quite know how that works for the Germans, if it's just a Japanese thing or also a German thing as well, but that's worth considering. Meanwhile, I need to catch my breath. If we take a look at the European theater, you can see here the Germans are already at war with the Polish nation. We've got all of these troops which we can start giving orders to and start attacking Poland, which we'll do in a moment. But you can see here, if we zoom out, we've got our troops on the border with Poland ready to execute Operation Fallweiss. We also have some troops on the border here with France. France is mobilized, but they're not yet at war. We can figure that out by going to the diplomacy screen. So, well, actually, that's cheating. So the UK and France both have 100%, which is saying they're at war, but they're not actually at war yet. I think if we were to... Yeah, so we could declare war on France. Basically, this 100% just means they're going to join the war next turn. We won't rush them. We'll let them wait their, couple of days. Historically, they declared war on the 3rd of September, so we'll let them do that. The diplomacy screen also has a wide range of other countries that you can interact with. So, for example, it has Bulgaria here, which is 70% leaning toward joining the Axis. This German Iron Cross represents the country that they're leaning toward joining, and this 70% represents how close they are. If they get to 100%, they will join the war. Meanwhile, Italy is its own little icon here, and they're at 65%. So they're really not ready to join the war on the side of the Axis yet, but we do have control of their units, so it's kind of a weird situation where they're acknowledged as being in the Axis, but we can't use them. Additionally, the diplomacy has been overhauled slightly from the last game. In the last game, Italy and Germany were represented on the diplomacy screen. Italy's been replaced by Japan, who has its own sort of Axis orientation here. No one's really oriented toward Japan, for what it's worth. But you could theoretically, it looks like we're not at war with Poland either, so I don't know why Poland is showing as 100%. But it is what it is, I guess. Poland and China are interchanged? That's weird. Anyway, so on this screen, you can actually invest in diplomacy. So you can purchase chits of diplomacy, which give you a chance of swinging a country toward your side. So, for example, if we're Germany, one thing I think we really want to do is we want to invest in diplomacy with the USSR, because we want to keep the USSR out of the war as long as possible. They're currently at 25% invested in the war. If we go ahead and, well, we don't have any money right now. Diplomacy costs 150 MPP, and we don't get a budget until turn 2. But theoretically, if we had 150 MPP, we could invest in trying to convince the USSR to join our side. Similarly, as Japan, we can kind of do the same thing. We do have 150 MPP as Japan, I think. So we'll go ahead and purchase a chit, which is 150 MPP, which represents income. We go ahead and hit yes, and there you go. We've invested one chit in the Soviet Union. There is a 5% chance that the Soviet Union will become more friendly toward its alignment with Japan. I don't know if that influence... Actually, I think it does influence both sides. So sort of the Axis is a general side in terms of diplomacy, because as you go here, you can see Japan's 5% counts. Germany has 5 influence chits. Japan has 3. We've just spent 1 of them. So we'll go ahead and close diplomacy for now. We also have research here, which we're not really going to have any money to spend on research yet either. But Germany, Italy, and Japan all have the ability to spend money on research. Right now, Germany's spending 1,025 MPPs invested in research. You can see they're invested in different categories, things like advanced subs, artillery, rocket weapons, anti-tank weapons. Italy's focusing more on long-range aircraft, ground attack weapons, and logistics. And Japan is focusing on naval weaponry, long-range aircraft, naval warfare, area warfare, army warfare, or infantry warfare, and logistics. Right now, we don't really have any money to spend at the moment on research, but theoretically we could, increase spending on, what would we want to increase it on? Anti-tank weapons if we had 100 MPP, but we don't have that. So the number here represents how much you have to spend, and the number here on the right represents sort of the level of investment. So, for example, each one of these is invested at 1 investment token. Italy might actually be able to afford investing in something. They can go with aerial warfare, naval warfare, logistics. Logistics might actually be a good idea for them. That or anti-tank weapons. We'll leave that as is. We'll let them kind of regain their income after turn 1. If we go over here to reports, you can get a whole bunch of reports about different things like cities, ports, oil production, mine production, and all these different towns. That has to do with like industrial production. You can also take a look at the losses of units. Nobody's lost anything yet, but you could see a breakdown of all the casualties of the war so far. We'll look at that probably more later. You can also get it all in graph form, so all these different things. And then the war maps, which basically is just kind of a diplomatic map that shows you, who's all at war with who. So Japan, for example, is at war with China, but nobody else. Germany is at war with Poland, but nobody else. That'll soon change for Germany. And Italy is at war with nobody. And the way you tell if someone's at war is if they got this little green circle around their country's flag. There's convoy maps where you can see all the different convoys that are going into different areas, I guess. There's a strategy map, which is the map we already saw, which shows you where all the units are. The percentage that country is, I guess, how they're diplomatically aligned, I suppose, or something. I'm not really sure. But anyway, that's all the different information here, and then you can also purchase stuff. So we could spend money to purchase things as Japan or as Italy or any of these countries. So Italy, for example, if we go there, we have 100 MPPs to spend, and if we chose to, we could go ahead and spend it on some anti-air, some motor torpedo boats, or some different things around here. We're not really going to spend anything as Italy at the moment. So, with all of that being said, why don't we get to work? Let me just check in with the chat, take a sip of my beer, catch my breath, and then we'll get to fighting. Thank you very much for the bits there, J Street. I do appreciate it. All right, so let's get in here to the Chinese theater. Let's look at Japan first, because it's a little bit smaller scale and not quite as much is going to happen here. So if we go over here, over to China, we can see Japan has a number of naval units at home in Japan. It has some army units in Manchuria, which is denoted by this little dotted line here, and then obviously the border. We want to leave our troops in Manchuria as is right now, because if we start pulling troops out of Manchuria, it'll invite a Soviet attack against us, which we don't want to do. What we can do, however, Seoul is not in Manchuria, and there's also a lower risk, I think, of uprisings in Seoul. So what I can actually do here is I can select this army unit, which is a corps size unit. There's three different sizes of infantry units. You have armies, which are the strongest units, and those are represented by 4 of these soldiers on the map. You have corps, which are smaller than armies. Usually an army is made up of 2 to 3 corps. Well, a corps is a smaller unit, so you got the 3 men here. And then a garrison, which is generally pretty weak, which is just 1 guy. So we have a corps currently in Seoul. I'm going to go ahead and write... Actually, intriguing idea. What if I pull this guy? I can't operate him? Doesn't look like it. I can't operate him either? I can't operate... Oh, I don't have any money. Of course I can't operate them. Well, then I'm not going to do that. But what I do think I'll do is I'll march... operate, by the way, is moving troops by rail, but it costs money to do it. So I'm actually going to move this corps currently in Seoul up to the border with Manchuria. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up taking this army unit out of Manchuria and moving it to the Chinese front. And then I'm going to move this corps in and replace the army unit in the town that it was in order to ensure that we still have the troops in the towns we need to keep Russia out of the war, but it'll actually prevent us from wasting an entire army unit there. We'll keep the 1 army unit up here in the north because it is directly on the border with Russia, so it's probably better to have a strong unit there in the event that they do attack. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the map down here. We're going to go ahead and move the army unit in Hangzhou out of that town. We're going to move it over here to the west, just to the east of Changsha, which I believe is one of the major industrial centers of China. And then we're going to go ahead and have troops on 3 sides of this Chinese corps unit. Now, some of these units are behind fortifications. I think that's what these little sort of almost barbed wire-like icons look like. But these guys are not. So that indicates to me that they're going to be a little bit weaker. So what I'm going to do to soften them up first is I'm going to go ahead and click on this unit. It's the 21st Naval Flotilla Bombing Group. It's a tactical bomber. It's a 2-engine bomber. And we're going to go ahead and highlight the unit we want it to attack. Doesn't look like it's going to do any damage. That's fine. We'll go ahead and issue the order to attack. You'll get a nice little sound effect. They bomb the troops to no effect. We're going to go ahead and use this dive bomber unit, another naval bomber unit, and we're going to attack them as well. And there you go. We did some damage. Now we're going to use these fighters to strafe these guys. And it looks like the fighters took some flak damage. Do we have any carriers that can hit any of them? I don't think so. So we've kind of softened them up a little bit, I think. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and attack these guys. First, we're going to attack with the 34th Army. You can see they have a strength of 11. That's represented here. They can have every unit's sort of stock strength is 10 as a max strength, but when you have experience, which is represented by these little icons down here, you can actually have a stronger than 10 units. So as units experience up, they're able to be more effective. So we're going to go ahead and attack. It'll attack with a level 4. It didn't take any casualties, and you can see this National's Chinese unit is decreasing in strength. We'll go ahead and attack with the 11th Regional Army, which will do damage of 2. Although the estimate was wrong, they only did 1 damage. And then we'll attack with the Central Expedition Army in China here, which is set to do 4 damage. They actually did 5. And they eliminated the enemy unit. They will now advance. Sometimes if you attack, you can actually advance after you attack if you destroy the enemy unit. So they'll go ahead and advance 1 hex. You can see the map moves out a little bit, and we gained a little bit more ground in China. We're going to leave these garrison units in place. I'm not going to attack in the north anywhere because, frankly, all of these units would be at a disadvantage if we attacked. So we're going to avoid moving any of those troops. And then we're going to go ahead and move some naval units. So we've got a bunch of aircraft carriers at port in various Chinese towns. I'm actually going to move all of those carriers here to the south. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to attack the Chinese town of Nanning, but I don't really have any air forces in the south, and I've got very limited troops in the south. So we're going to go ahead and move our carriers to the south in order to attempt to bombard the enemy. I'm not too worried. I'm not at war with Japan or the U.S. or the UK, so there really shouldn't be any threats to my naval forces. We'll also go ahead and move our light carrier as well, because, again, carriers have air wings, so they have the ability to attack land targets as well as naval targets. We're going to go ahead and move the... Actually, let's wait to move the Kaga. Let's move the 1st Corps, which is sort of on the southern tip of China here. It's going to advance into the town of Pakyoi, and then they're going to advance to adjacent to Nanning. You can see here it reports enemy contact, which means as we moved up and discovered that there were enemy troops here, they engaged us, but no one ended up being hurt. Let's see here. I don't think this army here in Canton can move to support Nanning because there's terrain restrictions here. You can see they can move this way, but they can't move adjacent because there's some mountains or something or other. So we're going to leave them in Canton just in case the China... Well, actually, if we can't move there, then presumably these guys could come down this rail line. I don't want to abandon Canton. It's an important supply city. So we'll leave them where they are. And then we'll go ahead and move the Kaga in, and it doesn't look like they can move and attack on the same turn. So we'll just move the Kaga over there. Meanwhile, we've got a naval unit here with the 17th Korean Army or Corps or something currently at sea. So we're going to go ahead and sail these guys over to the port near Pakyoi now that we've taken it, and they'll unload their troops there next turn. These guys are not at full strength, so I don't really want to do anything with them, I don't think. Yeah, we'll leave those guys as is. I don't have any money to pull like these troops out of Japan itself, and the Chinese don't have any troops on the coast anymore because we've driven so far inland. So there's no one to bombard, so there's no real reason to move our surface fleets. So I think that's about it for Japan this turn. We don't have any money for diplomacy, and we already moved our units. We don't have any real money to purchase new units because we spent all the money we had on diplomacy. So Japan has $0, and we've moved all the forces that I want to move. So with that being said, let's move to the European theater. Stokrog, thank you for the subscription there and the 11 months of being a subscriber. Always appreciate the support to the channel that you give. All right, so we're now looking at the European theater. So if I zoom out here, we can see this is Germany, obviously, and all these different supply cities or national morale objectives or blah, blah, blah. And we're now at war with both France and with Poland. Now, if we zoom in here, I don't want to attack France because we're not technically at war with them yet. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what do we want to do to knock Poland out of the war as quickly as possible. And I think the best way to do that is, well, obviously the best way to do that is to take their capital in Warsaw. But what I'm actually going to do first is there's a free city here in Danzig, and if we don't do anything here, I think they'll actually raise a cavalry unit and kind of plunder the free city's arsenal. So we're going to go ahead and move these troops of the 1st Frontier Corps through into Poland. They're going to, well, actually, we'll just move them into... We'll move this garrison, the 14th garrison in Germany, currently in Königsberg, into Danzig to take the city. And then we're going to move the 1st Frontier Corps into Poland here. And you can see here they'll start to take ground. So we've advanced into Poland. We could attack with these guys. We could attack this enemy cavalry unit. We could attack this infantry unit. But now we kind of have to figure out, all right, so we've secured Danzig. What do we really want to do? Well, I think the answer to that is try and isolate these ground units down here and destroy them. To do that, we really want to surround them. I don't really have a good way to do that. Maybe with some of these land units up here in the north. And then driving here up from the south. But that would be a pretty wide pocket. I don't know if I could really pull that off. What we could potentially do is we could try and destroy this cavalry unit and then cut these 3 units off and destroy them like that. So I think that's what we're going to do. To figure out if we can do that, we'll have to try and bombard them with aircraft. So we've got the tactical bomber unit here. We're going to go ahead and bombard this enemy cavalry unit. You can see the Polish are sending up some fighters to intercept us. We have escorts with those fighters, so we inflicted 2 air casualties on the Poles. We lost 1 of our own, and the bombers didn't suffer any damage. Meanwhile, they did destroy 1 of the Polish cavalry hit points. And now, according to intelligence anyway, the 4th Panzer tank unit can go ahead and attack and should destroy this Polish unit. So we'll attack. We'll destroy it there. And you can see here we have sort of a breakout ability. Now that we destroy this, there's a hole in the enemy line, and we can drive all the way north to the border of Warsaw. As we drove that way, we did make contact with the enemy, so there was an engagement there, but no casualties were suffered. And now what we can actually do is, all we have to do is advance these guys up the road, and they'll cut off the Polish troops in here, which should have an impact on their effectiveness. So just like that, we're at the gates of Warsaw. Look at how easy that was. So I think what I'll do now is I'm going to go ahead and advance these infantry units in Presnau. Actually, I'd rather advance an army, but I don't have any armies there. So I'm going to advance the 7th Corps, or whatever this is, 8th Corps, up north of the Vistula, east of the Vistula, and just south of Warsaw. So we'll do that. And you can see here we've now surrounded these troops, although theoretically they could probably pretty easily break out. We're going to reinforce that cordon around the Polish troops by advancing this unit of, what are they? Slovakian troops, which are also on our side, a minor ally, to the east along this sort of junction here, so that we'll get in the rear of the Polish troops there. And then we're going to advance this corps of troops over here. Where do we want to advance them? What's the best way to block their... Actually, what we'll do is we'll advance the 14th Army here, and then we'll advance these these troops in behind the enemy here. And just like that, we'll have... They may only have 1 hex that they're surrounded by, but they'll have to go through an entire German army to escape, and I think that's somewhat unlikely. They could drive north, but we're also going to put troops there. So let's go ahead and see about moving the 8th Corps. Intelligence claims I can destroy that unit. We're going to try and strafe them. Didn't do us any good. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to attack this cavalry. Okay. So maybe they can drive north to Lutz. They might be able to break out, I'm not sure. We'll see. They might actually be able to break out. Well, now these guys certainly just have to move east. Unless... Yeah, it doesn't look like they'll get there. Their Stukas can't reach either. So they might be able to break out of this pocket. I'm not too worried. They're both weak units. They shouldn't be too much of a threat. Okay, so we've surrounded these 2 units. We destroyed 1 unit, drove back another army unit on the border, and we're also on the gates of Warsaw. So far, so good in this game. We'll go ahead and advance some of our other units, which I don't think can really... I don't think any of these guys can get to Warsaw. These guys might be able to advance, but they don't. There's no support behind them. Let's go ahead and we got some strategic bombers here, some medium bombers here. Doesn't look like they can reach Warsaw either. So I don't know what to do. All right. let's advance these guys. We're going to go ahead and try and knock out this fort, because it kind of blocks our northern advance onto Warsaw. You can see here the casualty figures are not to our favor, but I'm just hoping that maybe we can reduce it anyway. And the answer to that appears to be nope, we can't. But we did weaken them at least, so we should hopefully be able to finish them off next turn. Meanwhile, these guys already moved, so they'll attack this cavalry. We'll drive them back. Alright, so my armor attacked, and now armor, by the way, appears to be the only units that can move, attack, and then move again. So we'll advance these guys here. Alright, so we'll try and attack this army unit here. It's stronger than our corps, so... Okay, so kind of some uncoordinated action on my own part. But actually, we'll do this. We'll move this unit here. So we've now effectively surrounded this Polish army here in the north, which is still pretty strong. We also have multiple units that are approaching Warsaw next turn, and I think that about does it for our units here. Wow. So the next unit isn't gonna... It's going to take me right to my naval units, which isn't really what I'm interested in doing. We're going to leave all of our ground units in place, I think. We will bring these guys down south from Cologne. They were bordering Poland, but you can see these little icons represent forts, if you will, so we'll make sure that we're not going to take troops on the border here because those guys wouldn't be entrenched. But we'll move these guys over here and have our entire front against France fortified. We've got one air unit on the western front. Meanwhile, everybody over here has already moved. They haven't all attacked, but that's fine. I'm not really interested in launching feudal attacks against Polish tanks. So we'll leave them as is for now, and we'll see how that plays out. Meanwhile, in the naval realm, we're going to go ahead and start moving some naval units around here. So you can see here we have the Deutschland, the heavy German cruiser, which is actually like a pocket battleship, and the U-30 currently at sea. They're both, I believe, in sort of engagement mode, if you will. There's an option to sleep, but we're going to go ahead and have them, and they're also currently hunting. That's what the little blue circle represents. So we're actually going to have them fan out. We'll have this zoom out. Oh, that rhymed. We're going to have these subs, the U-30s, move over here to the east, just west of the Bay of Biscay, toward this convoy route. This red line here represents an active convoy route. A white line represents an inactive convoy route. So we currently have just one British active convoy route because their allies technically are not yet at war with them. So we'll put a sub here, which will intercept this active convoy route. This route will go active as soon as the Canadians go to war, so probably next turn. And we'll just kind of leave this heavy cruiser where it is. Meanwhile, in the South Atlantic, we have the Graf Spee, which is going to be along the convoy route that comes, I think, from like South Africa. Yep, from Cape Town. So we're going to go ahead and move these guys all the way south toward Monrovia, and they'll also intercept that convoy route once the British colonies start declaring war. So we're really setting our forces up to hopefully impact British shipping. We've got one more sub, U-32, which can't reach any active routes. This one that they can reach is to Russia, which is going to be inactive for a while because, well, Russia's not at war with us, hopefully for a while. But we'll move them over that direction anyway. Meanwhile, we're going to move, I think, more of our subs out to sea. So we're going to move these guys out this way. It's going to take a little while for them to get out there. I'm kind of tempted to send like my Gneisenau and my Scharnhorst and whatnot, these other ships out as well. But we'll leave them as is for now. We may need them in the invasion of Norway, so I don't want to get my fleet totally destroyed. Meanwhile, Italy, there's not really anything I want to do here. Maybe reinforce these tanks. So we'll give them... They can increase by up to 7. They can increase up to 10 strength. They have no experience, so there's no worry about elite reinforcements. So we'll go ahead and increase their strength to 10. They're now fully reinforced. And these infantry units, can we afford anything there? We can afford 1. So we'll increase them to 9. So I'm going to try and beef up the Italian military in this period where they're not at war with anybody. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here, and we're going to go ahead and pick this up in our next episode, probably tomorrow or maybe the day after. This was a first look and a sneak peek at the new Strategic Command World at War game, which is coming out on December 7th, made by Fury Software, published by Matrix and Slitherine Games, and the second of the newer Strategic Commands. As I said in the intro, Strategic Command was a long-running series that dates back to the early 2000s and some publishing through Battlefront. Slitherine has since picked up the license and is now publishing these games, and Fury is developing new games. With that being said, this was taken from a live stream from just last night, so I'm going to go ahead and end this here today, and we'll pick up the continuation of that stream tomorrow. Until then, thank you all for tuning in once again, and until tomorrow, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.